Imperium, The Philosophy of History and Politics, Part 2, Chapter 3, The Laws of Totality and Sovereignty. The organic laws of sovereignty and totality refer to all political units whatever. They describe any unit, whatever its provenance, that reaches the degree of intensity of expression at which it participates in a friend-enemy disjunction. Totality refers both to issues within the organism and to persons within the organism. Any issue within the organism is subject to political determination because every issue is potentially political. Any person in the organism is existentially embraced in the organism. Sovereignty places the decision in every important juncture with the organism. Both of these laws are existential. Like all organic conditions, either the organism is true to them or it is faced with sickness and death. Both laws will be explained. First, the law of totality. Any contrast, opposition, or hostility whatever existing within groups among the organism may become political in its nature if it reaches the point where a group or a unit feels another group, class, or stratum to be a real enemy. For such a unit to arise within an organism is for the possibility of civil war to be present, or a severe crisis in the organism, which renders the organism liable to damage or extinction from without. Therefore, every organism by its very existence has the characteristic that it assumes power over the determination of all issues. This does not mean that it plans the total life of the population, economic, social, religious, educational, legal, technical, recreational. It means merely that all of these things are subject to political determination. Many of these things are neutral to some states, but objects of interest to others. But all organisms will intervene when an inner grouping may possibly become a focus of a friend-enemy disjunction. This describes all political units whatever, entirely independently of how they formulate their written constitutions, if they have any. The law of totality affects individuals by embracing them existentially in the life of the organism. Politics places the life of every man within the political unit in the balance. It demands, by its very existence, the readiness of all individuals in the service of its fulfillment to risk their lives. Other groups may demand dues, periodical attendance at meetings, investment of time in group projects. If they demand, however, so fundamental is this organic law of totality, that the member plight his life to the group, they become therewith political. The French public law professor Horion designated it as the hallmark of a political unit that it embraced the individual entirely, whereas non-political groups embrace him only partially. This is the law of totality in other words. It is thus a touchstone of a group for this purpose, whether it demands an existential oath. If a group extracts such an oath from members, the group is political. This law of totality, it is hardly necessary to add, is not at all derived from conscription for military service. Conscription exists only for a few centuries within a high culture, whereas the law of totality describes the culture itself when it is itself constituted as a political organism, and, during the period of concentration of politics in culture states, it describes every individual state. Like all organic laws, it is existential. If any inner force can challenge it, the organism is sick. If the challenge is attended with success, the organism is in severe crisis and may be annihilated. In any case, its unity will be temporarily in abeyance, with the possibility of partitioning by outer powers. The law of sovereignty is the inner necessity of organic existence, which places the decision in every important juncture with the organism, as opposed to allowing any group within to make the decision. An important juncture is any one which affects the organism as a whole, its steering in the world, its choice of allies and enemies, the decision of war and peace, its inner peace, its unchallenged inner right to decide controversies. If any of these can be called into question, it is a sign that the organism is sick. In the healthy organism, This sovereignty is absolutely undisputed, and may continue so for centuries. But a new age with new interests may raise contrasts which the rulers do not grasp. They may blunder, and find themselves on the defensive in a civil war. The challenge of the sovereignty of the organism was the first symptom of crisis. If the organism survives the crisis, the new rulers of the same organism will be the focus of the same sovereignty. An important fact has been touched upon with this. It is not the rulers who are sovereign within the meaning of this law. Their powers, in fact, are derived from their symbolic representative position. If a stratum represents and acts in the spirit of the age, revolution against it is impossible. An organism true to itself cannot be sick or in crisis. The law of sovereignty does not mean that every aspect of group life within the organism is dominated at all times by the political, nor that everything is organized, or that a centralized system of government necessarily reaches out always and destroys every organization of whatever kind. The outlook developed here is purely factual, and the law of sovereignty describes all political organisms. It is a formulation in words of a quintessential characteristic of a political organism. Totality of organization, the total state, is a phase of political organizations at certain times and under certain conditions. Some states are neutral in religious matters. Others promulgate an official religion. Some states during the 19th century were more or less neutral economically. Others intervened in the economic life. In the 20th century, all states intervene in economic affairs. Different terminology is used to describe this intervention in different states, and the degree of intervention depends on the necessity of the organism. Thus, an organism with relatively abundant economic resources will intervene to a lesser degree than one which must make every particle of work and material count. But this does not alter the fact that all states intervene in economics in the 20th century. The law of sovereignty is independent of the fact that in a given organism, some internal force, say religion or economics, may be stronger than the government. Such a thing can, and often does, exist. If this internal force is not yet strong enough to hinder the government, it is not yet political. If it is strong enough only to stalemate the government, but not yet strong enough to create war, then there is no political unit present. If no one can make a determination of enmity or of war, there is no politics. This means that other units which preserve their political character can either ignore the sick unit in making their own combinations, or can attack it with good initial advantage. The law of sovereignty is thus also existential. It describes a healthy organism on its path to fulfillment. Where this law does not obtain, the organism is, vis-a-vis other organisms of the same kind, in abeyance, and if this condition persists, the political organism will disappear. The best example of a case where the law of sovereignty showed its existential character is that of 18th century anarchic Poland. The weakness and sickness of the organism led to its repeated partitioning.